Hey there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Melanie, for those of you who don't know, and I love stories. I love talking about them, dissecting them, what I learned from them, and I don't just love books. Even though I love writing books, I think you can learn from all types of stories. And today I want to talk about what I learned from 2022's The Batman. Before we begin, here's a spoiler warning. I will be talking about some things because some of the things I learned were most efficient because of how the story ended and where it went and how it progressed. Anyway, this movie came out last month and I've seen it twice. I love this movie. Right off the bat, some things that I love. I love the dynamics between the characters. This movie looks incredible. I think both times I had to be like, okay, pay attention. What are you actually getting from this? Because cinematography is beautiful. It just is perfectly dirty, but nothing feels so dark that you can't like understand what's going on. Something I hate about a lot of movies is that when they're in a dark setting, you still are like, okay, but what's happening? And this movie succeeded in being dark, both literally and story-wise, and still having enough light and efficient lighting to show you what you need to see. I love the score. Michael Giacchino, I think? Giacchino? I don't know how you say his name. I've got to look that one up. He does great work, and upon watching it the second time and listening to the score on my own, I've really come to appreciate the scoring. It's awesome, and I love it. A lot of people going into this movie have asked, is this going to be a fresh take on Batman, or is this just another superhero story? I wasn't so sure, but I had my hopes for Robert Pattinson. And for the rest of the cast, I love Jeffrey Wright. As James Gordon, he is a wonderful casting choice. His voice is perfectly suited to accompany the more silent Batman that we get in this film. And they're just such a good team. Something I really appreciate from this movie, something I learned from it, are how to do dynamics with different characters. Something I totally appreciate about this Bruce Wayne / Batman figure is that each dynamic he has with each person is really well played out beyond just the acting, though the acting is incredible. They utilize him more as a detective in this story, and that detective work goes way back to the early Batman who was solving these crimes of Gotham. And you get to see how smart Bruce Wayne is, how the Batman can solve these riddles. He's not always able to keep up, but it gives him some of that personality and insight into how he's effective as the Batman, and part of that is his detective work. Something interesting they did with the Bruce Wayne side of this character, he is mostly just the Batman. And I think in an interview, Robert Pattinson talks about how he, like, being the playboy along this brooding detective character doesn't really make sense. Like, that's a lot of pretending for a person to do, and it makes more sense that this Batman would just be Batman, and he's kind of a hermit outside of that. He can barely make it to meetings. He's not really paying attention to how his fortune might be able to help people, and he's out on the streets being Batman. And then when he's in the public eye, he's not this playboy. He's not going around and spending money in a purposeless way. He's not trying to shield himself from anyone that way. He's simply a nocturnal vigilante who occasionally goes out to maybe pay his respects or attend a meeting, and no one would expect he would be the Batman because he's not in the public eye. Something I've noticed about this Batman is he is tough and he's intimidating, but in some ways he's open. And Robert Pattinson does a really good job of acting with little dialogue. I think some people say that he wasn't given much to work with, that he wasn't given the Bruce Wayne side. And I think that is partly true because he's blocking out the Bruce Wayne side for good reason, and I'll get there. But he is still open in some ways. He journals. That's like the opening thing, is him writing in his journal. There's like a voiceover, and it's effective. I like it. You don't usually hear voiceover type things in movies these days, but it worked really well for the character, to introduce him, to introduce how he sees himself and the work that he's doing, and he takes it very, very seriously. He works well with Detective Gordon, trusts him, believes in him, and even when faced with the man who most likely killed his parents, he sticks to his moral code, the classic no-kill rule that Batman has. He sticks to it. I still think that this is a very honorable Batman. He's a little bit more tired and broken and less reactive. He's very quiet and very smart, and you see in his face everything that he's thinking, and part of that allows him to be closer to people, allows him to form these relationships. The relationships didn't feel forced because they were working together so they could grow closer. I think when writing a cold and quiet character, you can tend to make them kind of bland, but you still get a sense of this is a person. He feels like a young Batman, where he's been Batman for 2 years, but he's like young Bruce Wayne and he's still hurting from what happened to his parents, which is always, you know, the Bruce Wayne motivator. But this is why he dons the cape. This is why he beats up criminals. He is out there for vengeance, and he is called Vengeance. There's only one time in the movie where he himself calls himself the Batman. Everyone else, and including himself, call him Vengeance, because that is his goal, and that is his one goal. And in the dynamic of that, he is mostly bringing fear to people. And when other people are afraid, like Gordon or Catwoman, for the people they care about, or their jobs, or solving, you know, the riddles from the Riddler, they turn to him to chase down these places and people of fear and that rule by fear, because the way the Riddler kills people is dark. What happened to Catwoman's roommate is heavy, and the person there to help is the Batman. He follows where fear follows because he wants to control that fear. Part of his dynamic there with those characters is really interesting, but I would say so much of that credit does go to Robert Pattinson, who is a good actor and can bring so much just with like this, you know, and he's got the dark eyes. He does a lot with very little of his face being shown and very little dialogue to say. And that works in films and TV shows and visual media. But when it comes to creating a story in our mind, in our readers' minds, how can a writer of books, how can we give more depth to these quiet, brooding characters? And I was thinking about it, and I think a classic one is just thought dialogue. I don't think it's too cheesy. I think go for it, you know? I have a lot of conversations in my head, and I think that that is like the most effective way that I know who I am, is how I think and how I process the world around me. So with these quiet characters, someone like the Batman, it makes sense that you're getting like his journaling, and you can do that with a character in a book. You don't have an actor, so be that actor. Give them physical reactions, thought dialogue, and then in the personal relationships, allow them to open up in a way that makes sense for them. I think the most open that Bruce Wayne is with anyone is when he's with Alfred, especially after Alfred is hurt. He really is kind of rude to Alfred earlier on, kind of dismisses him, says he's not a true Wayne, he's not his dad, like leave me alone. He's a little bit grumpy. And then when Alfred's life is threatened in an explosion, and Alfred wakes up, he talks to him about everything and finds out a lot about his parents. And in that moment, Bruce Wayne tells Alfred that he never thought he would have to be that scared again, that losing Alfred felt like losing his parents. And so when he got Alfred back, he realized how much he'd been driven by fear. So I think some people have critiqued, and it's almost like just because they didn't get an origin story, that he's been Batman for 2 years, we don't get the original donning of the cape, that he isn't Batman for any reason. He became Batman because he was afraid, and fear can bring on, you know, the vengeance side of things. It's that slippery slope of giving in to what you're afraid of and letting that control you. And he's able to talk about this very deep thing without having to have like a thought monologue about it. And without having to like just randomly tell someone. It makes sense for him to tell Alfred in that moment and to realize it, and for it to shape his character through the rest of the story. This kind of leads into my second point about the lie a character believes about themselves. You may or may not have heard of this. It's a thing that a lot of people talk about. That a lot of characters, like regular people, believe a lie. Believe in something wrong about their situation or themselves. The Batman shows us a character who is living in fear and how that fear shapes the lies that they believe about themselves. And the biggest lie about him is that he is only vengeance, that is his only goal, and that is how he's going to help people. This is who Bruce Wayne thinks he needs to be to keep Gotham from sinking into a darker, more violent place. And it's what helps him feel like he can control what happened to his parents, even though that is long in the past. That lie begins to strip away when he opens up to Alfred about how afraid he was to lose him. And it shows that the Batman, more so vengeance, is who he is to keep from being who Gotham needs, to keep from addressing who he actually is. You don't get much of Bruce Wayne because he's so consumed by vengeance and by fear. And fear makes him think he can control things by being vengeful. This is all tied together when one of the Riddler goons declares, "I am vengeance." And after the Riddler's entire monologue about being an orphan and his own need for vengeance, you can see the change in Bruce Wayne. The moment that he cuts himself off this cord and goes down and rescues people who are trapped because of this flood. "I am vengeance" statement from his enemy brings to light the undeniable truth that Bruce Wayne's Batman must be more than vengeance, that people also need hope. And it all ties back into the beginning of the film where Batman emerges from the darkness to beat up this gang of people who are assaulting this man. And the man who was being assaulted after Batman beats everybody up is afraid as well. Even though his life was just saved, he was scared. In the end, you see the contrast. Batman, as the sun rises, lifts a woman out of the rubble and she clings to him. She needs him. So it's not that the Batman is pushed aside in this. It's not that he just needs to be Mr. Hope and Righteousness. He is a gray character. He's still going to beat up some bad people. He's still going to hide in the shadows. He's still going to bring fear to the entirety of Gotham. It still needs that. But he recognizes that if all he does is drive himself through fear to vengeance, he will become as bad as all the other criminals. He will cause as much chaos and pain and violence as the criminals do, who think that they are justified. And he knows he can do something more. What that is, we don't fully know yet. We just know that he is growing and his motivations are becoming more truthful and honest and less driven by the lie and the fear. As writers, how can we do this? I think if you introduce a self-belief, something that drives your character, that maybe is wrong about them or that they're in denial about, if you introduce that early on, you can provide your character with challenges that specifically challenge that belief so that they know, this is how I believe this thing about myself and my environment, my world, my life. Here are these obstacles that directly say, are you sure about that? You want to see what each scene can teach your character. Is your character teachable? Are they more stubborn? How deep is the lie? Where did it come from? Is there trauma associated with it? People don't just believe lies for no reason. People have issues and they need to be able to talk about and open up about them. And the character may not realize it right away. But I think if you give a lie that the character needs to strip away to reveal the truth about themselves and about the world and about what they need to do to accomplish a goal, then it gives a really satisfying conclusion to a story. I really liked that theme, that comparison with the Riddler, where even though the Riddler didn't even know that Batman was Bruce Wayne, he thought, I was an orphan like Bruce Wayne, and the Batman is vengeance. And yet Bruce Wayne has all this money, and I have nothing, and I need vengeance upon those who have what I don't have, who abuse their power. And yeah, those people are wrong. That's the thing, he never really takes out an innocent person, aside from when he bombs all of Gotham and starts a flood, but his specific targets are bad people. And so you see, how is Batman different from that? How can he distinguish himself from the darkest points of Gotham? How can your character distinguish themselves from the thing they hate and the lie they believe? How can you keep them from drowning in, this lie? Or how can you show that arc either downward of them digging into the lie and committing to it and doubling down, or crawling out of it by discovering the truth about themselves? Anyway, I loved this movie. I learned some pretty interesting things from it. Most of all, I love just watching it. I love the music. I love the vibes. I'm not super picky when the vibes are on point. And I think the characters were really well done. I'm excited to see where Batman goes next. I love Robert Pattinson as Batman. I think he nailed it. And I think even if you don't have a good actor, you can still write that dark and brooding character and make him connect to other characters. And you can ask your characters questions about themselves that challenge them, help them grow. You don't want to leave them stuck, but you want to make them just dumb enough that they don't figure it out at the very beginning. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I love this movie. Please check it out. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like, subscribe, share, and I will see you next time.